Coming in at number 5. Oh my God. What is up, YouTube? This is the God Bombs. I'm back again with another YouTube review. This time it is my personal favorite top 10 industrial metal albums of all time. Industrial metal is my favorite genre of music. My band, the God Bombs, is oftentimes an industrial metal or industrial rock band in sound. This is a genre that I know probably more than any other genre of music. So I want to give you my top 10 albums. Some of them are going to be unexpected. Even though you might know the artist, it might not be necessarily the most popular album from that artist, because I feel like sometimes it's not always the most popular one that really showcases the most interesting or exciting addition to the genre. But first, before I give the top 10, I want to start with honorable mentions. The first one I want to mention is Godhead, 2,000 Years of Human Error. Godhead is a band that was classified as industrial rock or nu metal. They came out in the early 2000s and they were featured on Queen of the Damned soundtrack. They were actually signed to Marilyn Manson's label, Post-Human Records. They were like the only band that Marilyn Manson ever signed to his label, and he just abandoned the label right after. So they're kind of a weird anomaly. They have other albums, but I feel like this album is really a great like industrial rock classic. The singer from Godhead, Jason Miller, has like a really cool bluesy singing style, almost crooning. It's unique for that reason, I think, compared to all the other albums on my list. It has the most bluesiness. There's even some harmonica on the album. Now that would make sense because Jason Miller, after Godhead broke up, he went on to do some country type music. Jason Miller has returned to the industrial scene lately. He was on the Cyberpunk 2077 soundtrack under the name Rezodrone. Those songs are actually really cool. I definitely encourage you guys to check them out. But 2,000 Years of Human Error is definitely the best Godhead album. Marilyn Manson is considered an executive producer on the album, and he's actually featured on the song Break You Down. I feel like that it's an extremely underrated band, so I definitely recommend you check out Godhead, 2,000 Years of Human Error. Now that brings me to my next honorable mention, which is the project called Error, which was a project by Atticus Ross, who is now known as one half of Nine Inch Nails. They did a 1 EP in 2004, and that's all they ever released. This EP is insane. It features Greg Piatto, the singer from Dillinger Estate Plan, and it is wild. It's like industrial breakbeats with guitar and screaming, and it's super experimental all over the place. It sounds really, really, really fresh. Even now, if you listen to it, it sounds super cutting edge, way ahead of its time. The production is amazing, and I want to put this out there because I think that this project is so obscure and so underrated. And honestly, people say that Atticus Ross ruined Nine Inch Nails. Well, if you hear this Error EP, you're definitely going to think otherwise, because this thing is a masterpiece. So check out Error, the EP, self-titled EP by the band Error. My third and final honorable mention is the album Welt by Ogre. Ogre is the solo project of Nivek Ogre of Skinny Puppy. Skinny Puppy is going to be on our main list as well. Obviously, Skinny Puppy is a pioneer in this genre, although they're more known as electro-industrial versus industrial rock. Ogre's Welt album is definitely rock-oriented. It was kind of ahead of the curve, I feel like, because it incorporated that video game sound that became popular later in the mid-2000s. This album, Welt, is extremely innovative. And the only reason it's not on my top 10 is because Skinny Puppy is on my top 10, and I wanted to shout out as many different bands as possible without including so many side projects. But Welt by Ogre is absolutely a phenomenal album, as is the second album that Ogre released called Sunny Psyop. It's trippy, it's fun. Another thing I like about it is it kind of shows like a more lighthearted side of industrial, which is pretty rare, but it's also super heavy and really, really experimental and innovative. Now, this brings me to my top 10 industrial metal albums of all time. Coming in at number 10 is Three Teeth's self-titled album, Three Teeth. This is the first proper album from Three Teeth, and I think it's their best album. It's the perfect blend of experimental and hard-hitting. It has like that crazy mechanical riffing that just slams you in the face. It's instantly catchy and it just hits you hard. The production is amazing. It grabs you right away, hard-hitting. And I like how the voice is kind of buried in the mix. It kind of reminds me of artists like Ministry or Skinny Puppy, which are pioneers of the genre. Also, the artistry of Three Teeth was really exciting, especially when they first came out. It was very cutting edge. Alexis Mincola, the singer, is a graphic designer, and he incorporates like cutting-edge graphic design and video editing. The videos are disturbing. It's a good critique of capitalism and kind of how grotesque capitalism can be, and it has all the kinds of themes to it that we normally associate with industrial music, but it's totally just done so well, and it's just so hard-hitting from start to finish. It's badass, and you can't go wrong with Three Teeth. My next album, number 9, is going to be controversial. It's Godflesh, Us and Them. The fact that I'm including Godflesh on this list is not controversial at all. Godflesh is one of the pioneers of industrial metal. Justin K. Broderick came from the band Napalm Death, and he formed his project Godflesh and basically created industrial metal in the UK around the same time that Ministry was creating the genre here in the US. So Godflesh is considered to be one of the fathers of industrial metal for sure. However, the album Us and Them is a late career album for them. It came out in 1999. And this album merges elements of jungle music, drum and bass, hip-hop beats, and the familiar brutal industrial metal that Godflesh is known for. Now, this is not their most popular album by any stretch of the imagination. Justin K. Broderick even said he was embarrassed about this album. He had a mental breakdown after he made this album, but I think it's the best Godflesh album to include on this list because it's the most innovative and unique album that Godflesh produced later in their career. I think it sounds super fresh still to this day. I love the beats on it. I love the weird blending of genres all over the place. I mean, it just sounds menacing and brutal, but in a really creative, artsy way, and I think it showcases just how artistic industrial metal can be and how it can be such a fusion of different sounds and styles. So I definitely recommend this album from Godflesh. Obviously, more popular albums from Godflesh would be like their debut album Street Cleaner, or even later on the album Songs of Love and Hate. But Us and Them is the most innovative album of the new era, and I think it influenced a lot of things that came on later, like trap metal and things like that, which fuse hip-hop and metal. Us and Them really showcases Godflesh's place in music history. The next album on my list is going to be another one that might be controversial to some people. It's Orgy, Candyass. Now, this could be controversial because Orgy isn't really known as one of the top artists in the genre nowadays. They kind of drifted off with their more recent albums into a more EDM or like electro rock direction. But their debut album Candyass is absolutely an industrial rock classic. Obviously, everybody knows the cover of New Order, Blue Monday, which made them famous and made this a really successful album. But what I love about Orgy is they brought something super unique to the genre with their glam style. That high fashion couture image was unique and different at the time with their silver makeup and just very futuristic looking even to this day. I love the music videos for this album, and I think the album showcases such a unique sound. Amazing programming on this album from other members of the band who went on to form the group Julian K. Also, Jay Gordon's voice is phenomenal. I think he's one of the best singers in industrial rock. I love his vocals. Super melodic, but it has attitude to it, and nobody really sounds quite like Jay Gordon. This album just has such a unique sound, and it's so consistent throughout. Also, I want to shout out their second album, Vapor Transmissions, which kind of continued the same style, but took it in like a more cyberpunk, futuristic direction. But Candyass is gritty. It's dark, it's menacing, and it just rocks. It's a great album, and I highly recommend Candyass. Do not dismiss Orgy. They are definitely one of the more important bands of the genre, in my opinion. Coming in at number 7 is Ghostemane, Anti-Icon. This album came out in 2020 during the pandemic. Another controversial choice, probably because Ghostemane is more associated with trap metal. Ghostemane came up along with artists like Lil Peep in the trap metal scene or alternative trap scene. Some people call it emo rap. However, Anti-Icon is definitely an industrial rock or industrial metal album with trap elements. Yes, he does rap occasionally on the album, but there's a lot of industrial rock on there. It's super gritty. The production is amazing, super clean and clear. I love the distorted sounds on this album. I think it's way ahead of its time, and it definitely brought this genre back into popularity from an artist that was really hot at the time, and everyone was like excited to see what he was going to do next, and he definitely defied expectations with Anti-Icon. It's an amazing album from start to finish. The tracks flow really well from one to the other, super cutting edge sounding, and definitely a timeless classic. I highly recommend you guys check out Ghostemane, Anti-Icon. The next album coming in at number 6 is the infamous Skinny Puppy, The Process. This album was released in 1996, and it was a total disaster for the band. This was the album that came out when the band broke up. Now, Skinny Puppy is a band that comes from the 80s. They're one of the pioneers of electro-industrial music, and they're one of the best industrial artists of all time, but they're not necessarily known as like an industrial metal band or industrial rock band. And sometimes their fans get pissed off because Skinny Puppy, out of all these bands, is like the most electronic. Whenever they have guitar, there's like a debate among their fans as to whether or not it's good. But this album came out under a really stressful time for the band. They had been signed to a major label for the first time in their career because Nine Inch Nails and Marilyn Manson were super popular, and the record labels were trying to capitalize on that success. Obviously, Skinny Puppy came out before Nine Inch Nails. In fact, Nine Inch Nails' first ever tour was opening for Skinny Puppy. So I can imagine that it was an awkward position for them to be in. And their sound is super obscure and experimental, and they don't really work well if you try to like change them into like more formulaic sound. These sessions for this album brought out the worst in Skinny Puppy. They were doing a lot of drugs. Heroin use was rampant in the band. They were hanging out with Genesis P-Orridge from Throbbing Gristle, which is the band that first invented industrial music. The album was inspired by a cult called Process Church of the Final Judgment. So this album is somewhat of a concept album, but it's just a hot mess, and that's actually what I love about it. I think Skinny Puppy, especially the 90s Skinny Puppy, captured all the tensions that were happening in the band. The keyboardist, Dwayne Godflesh, overdosed towards the end of the creation of this album. Hurricanes, earthquakes, there was a studio that caught on fire. Pretty much everything that could go wrong went wrong during this album. The lead singer, Nevek Ogre, quit the band halfway through the album. This album is all over the place. It incorporates aspects of techno, industrial metal, cyber goth. It's super trippy sounding. It all flows from one to the other, but it's all over the place musically, and it has a lot of guitar in it, unlike a lot of other Skinny Puppy music, which is probably why I picked this album for my list of industrial rock or industrial metal great albums. I also want to shout out their albums Too Dark Park and Last Rites, which are other albums that came out in the 90s. I think that with The Process, Too Dark Park, and Last Rites is kind of a trilogy of albums. Any one of those could have easily been on this list, but I'm choosing The Process because it's such a special album that really took Skinny Puppy to the brink of disaster and beyond, and ended the band. Actually, the band was done for like a long time after this album came out. Coming in at number 5 is Rob Zombie, Hellbilly Deluxe. Now, this is maybe more of an obvious choice. It's Rob Zombie's biggest album in his career. It has bangers like Dragula, Living Dead Girl, but also a lot of really other great songs. All the songs on this album are bangers, and the reason I picked it is because it's just a classic. It's iconic. Rob Zombie took the heavy metal guitars and industrial beats of artists like Ministry, and he added a love of horror music. So you hear these horror samples throughout, clips from horror movies, creepy organs. It just, the whole album has like a great vibe to it, and to me, this is the best Rob Zombie solo album. None of the other ones really come close to this as far as just being an excellent album throughout. My only complaint about Hellbilly Deluxe is it's kind of short. I could have maybe had a few more songs on it. Now, I want to also give an honorable mention here to White Zombie's last album, Astro Creep. Astro Creep could have easily been my pick here, but I chose Hellbilly Deluxe because it's a little bit more iconic. It's a little bit more relevant nowadays. Everybody knows songs from Hellbilly Deluxe. It was one of the albums that really pushed industrial rock further into the mainstream. Now, a little bit of trivia here is that when Rob Zombie made Hellbilly Deluxe, his band, White Zombie, didn't even know that he was doing a solo album. He kept them in the dark about it completely and said nothing to them. And he was like, yeah, guys, we're going to record our next album soon. I'm just, doing my thing right now. And, they had no idea that he was planning on going solo. And then when the album blew up, that's when he ditched the White Zombie band and just went completely solo. So, I actually am more of a fan of White Zombie overall, and I would have easily just included them on my list instead of Rob Zombie, but I think that the Hellbilly Deluxe album has that industrial touch that we're really looking for here for this list, so that's why I chose Hellbilly Deluxe. Coming in at number 4 is the classic, incredible masterpiece of Marilyn Manson, Antichrist Superstar. Released in 1996, this album is so creative, it's so original. It was produced by Trent Reznor of Nine Inch Nails. It was the last album to feature the original guitarist of Marilyn Manson, Daisy Berkowitz, but also it showed the emergence of Twiggy Ramirez as a songwriter. Twiggy plays a lot of the guitar throughout the album. Members of Nine Inch Nails are also involved playing various instruments throughout the album. Marilyn Manson, of course, is in top form. The theme of the album is so iconic, with this sort of satanic theme of Manson being determined to become the Antichrist Superstar, transcending his humble roots and becoming this international Antichrist Superstar, larger than life. It was basically a prophecy that was self-fulfilling. The album is such an incredible example of a concept album, and I love the imagery associated with this album. All the imagery is so disturbing and dark, and it just fits so well together. It's so iconic. Manson on that podium with the shock symbol and ripping up the Bible. It was just so blasphemous. This album caused such a controversy when it came out. It was protests all around the country. Manson was banned from various venues. Manson became like a notorious shock rock icon. Now, some people would say this isn't industrial metal. They consider Marilyn Manson shock rock. However, shock rock is not really a genre of music. Technically, Antichrist Superstar is definitely an industrial metal album. From the fact that there was a producer of Skinny Puppy that was involved in the early phases of the album, to the fact that members of Nine Inch Nails were involved in the album, Trent Reznor produced the album, and just sonically you can clearly hear the influence of artists like Ministry on this album. So yes, this is an industrial metal album. Yes, it's one of the greatest industrial metal albums of all time. This is an absolute classic masterpiece. I guess my only criticism of Antichrist, or the only reason it's not number one here, is because it's just so emotionally exhausting, because it takes you on such high highs and such low lows that it feels like a roller coaster, and it's a long album, so it's just a lot. It's a huge experience to get through, and I love listening to it like a few times a year, but to just listen to it on a constant basis, it's not so realistic. Check out my review of Marilyn Manson, Antichrist Superstar, right up here. Coming in at number 3 is Rammstein, Mutter. Now, I don't know if I pronounced that right, but this album, I love the artwork. It's like a dead fetus on the cover. And I know it doesn't have the song Du Hast, which is Rammstein's most famous song. However, it's their best album overall. It's just so consistent throughout. It's just an incredible example of the industrial metal genre. The songs are so well produced. Everything is just clean and clear and heavy, but also catchy. And I love Till Lindemann's vocals. He's an amazing vocalist. It just flows so well. And even though Rammstein is not my favorite band on this list, I just think that Rammstein Mutter is a great example of industrial metal at its finest from start to finish. That's why I'm putting this album at number 3. At number 2 is Ministry, Psalm 69. Now, this is probably the most obvious pick of the whole list. We all know that Ministry is going to be on this list because they basically invented this genre. So I just want to say that my top 10 industrial metal albums could have easily just all been Ministry albums, because Ministry is the band that really encapsulates industrial metal more than any other band. And it was hard to choose an album. You know, I could have easily chosen The Land of and Honey, which is kind of the album that gave birth to this genre, and I think it's their most creative album. But the reason I chose Psalm 69 is because it's just so incredible from start to finish. It's iconic, it's experimental, but it's hard-hitting and catchy at the same time. It just showcases Ministry at their best. Ministry was on top of the world when this album came out. They were headlining at Lollapalooza, playing after Pearl Jam. I mean, this is when grunge was big and Ministry was headlining. So people give Nine Inch Nails credit a lot of times for like taking industrial metal to the mainstream, but really Ministry was the one that got that ball rolling, and this album went platinum. It's a classic masterpiece. Every single song on it is a banger. Amazing from start to finish. It's the best album that showcases the production team of Al Jourgensen and Paul Barker, aka Hypo Luxa and Hermes Pan. Now, I'm really excited for the new album that Ministry is about to put out, because once again, Paul Barker and Al Jourgensen are joining forces again to create a new album. So Paul Barker hasn't been in the band for a long time, and his presence has definitely been missed. Psalm 69 is a classic, iconic album. The tour for it is incredible. And also, I want to give a shout out to the album Sphincter, which is a live album that's mostly songs from Psalm 69 and Filth Pig. I think Filth Pig is another great album. It's a little bit more sludgier, but the songs from those albums together on the live one are so good and so cool, and I love how Ministry changes it up a little bit with how they play their stuff live. Definitely check out Sphincter as well, or of course Greatest Fits, which is Ministry's greatest hits album. That's how I originally got started with the band. But I'm going to pick Psalm 69 for this list. The last album on my list, number 1, is Nine Inch Nails, The Downward Spiral. I got my Downward Spiral tattoo right here. This album totally influenced me beyond almost any other album in existence. It was recorded at the infamous Sharon Tate house where Roman Polanski and his wife Sharon Tate lived, and Sharon Tate was brutally murdered by members of the Manson family following the orders of Charles Manson in the Hollywood Hills. So it has this weird dark history to it. Reznor called his studio Le Pig because that was the door originally had the word pig written on it in blood by the Manson followers. This album is just spooky. It's otherworldly sounding. There's incredible found sound experiments throughout the album that just create this ambiance that's unlike any other album I've ever heard. It's just so unique, and it's so all over the place, but it all flows so perfectly, and it's so innovative. I would say out of all these albums, Downward Spiral will go down as a masterpiece album throughout history. It's so innovative, so unique. It takes this really harsh, aggressive genre and somehow makes it human, even though it's so mechanical and distorted. There's like a soul in the middle of it, and that's how Trent Reznor kind of comes through all the mechanical chaos with this beautiful organic piano moments and this just soulfulness. I mean, the musicality is what really sets Trent Reznor apart. You know, the people say Nine Inch Nails is the band that took industrial to the mainstream, and it's because Trent Reznor studied piano from a young age. He was like a musical virtuoso, and most industrial artists are not musically trained. It's kind of more of like a punk type genre. There's a soul in the midst of that machine that is a beautiful musical soul, and it kind of ties it all together. So I think Reznor really transcended the genre and also defined the genre with this album, Downward Spiral. Downward Spiral will easily go down as one of the best albums of the 90s, if not of all time. And most people who say that don't even like industrial music. So the fact that he was able to reach outside of the parameters of what industrial can be and who industrial can reach really shows you just how incredible of a musician and artist than Trent Reznor is. And I think every industrial band wants to be like Nine Inch Nails, where they can kind of like reach a bigger audience with this difficult genre of music that we do. You know, I know that for me as a singer of the God Bombs, I can only dream to make an album so good as the Downward Spiral that it really reaches outside of this genre and reaches millions of people. So that's my list of the top 10 industrial metal albums of all time. Let me know what you guys thought of my list. Were there some artists that you thought I should have mentioned here? Like, let's say KMFDM, Frontline Assembly, Stabbing Westward, Tim Skold, Cyclone 9. Who did you think should have been on my list that wasn't? Of the artists that I mentioned, did you feel like it should have been a different album that I picked to be on my list instead of the album that I picked? Let me know what you guys think in the comments, and let me know what your list of the top 10 industrial metal albums is in the comments. As always, like, subscribe to the God Bombs, and bombs away.